killing of unborn children is a moral issue. It will bring the judgment of God upon a nation that allows the shedding of innocent blood over time. I think the Bible clearly teaches that. And I believe it's our first duty as elected officials to bring an end to it.
Vote against the bill because we believe that it's an attack on women, it's an attack on doctors, and we're going to have no part of it.
Brad Hutto right there, Senator Brad Hutto, also Senator Richard Cash, talking about the Unborn Child Protection Act. Second hearing this past week on that bill, which is considered to be the most restrictive proposal in the entire country. However, it failed to gain any type of traction. It is not officially gone, could be picked up in January, but that is where we begin this week on Connect to the Capitol here on this Sunday morning. Thank you for joining us, and as always, we also get you connected to the capital of the nation, because Dave Wilson and Catherine Glenn Foster are up there again this week. Well, Catherine's back in the country, so that's good. We got her home. That whole government shutdown thing. I thought you were going to swim back
this week.
Yeah, yes, and I'm back in one of the U.S. capitals.
There we go. That's what we want. You're not in Paris this time. Okay. We talked about this bill a few weeks ago. We had the hearing about a month back that went on for hours. Not popular, even with most of the groups that are against abortion. They won't back this plan. We may see it again, but it doesn't look good.
That's exactly right. So when we talked about this previously, we went through some of the different issues with this bill, and there are many. One of the worst being that this bill could send a woman who has an abortion to prison for up to 30 years. That is something that goes against not only decades, nearly centuries of tradition from coast to coast in every single U.S. state who have uniformly refused to prosecute the mother, seeing her as, at most, a second victim of an abortion culture, but would just, it would be such an outlier. And so you're right, after these two hearings, days of testimony, debates, finally, we have seen that not only did all of the Democrats, as expected, vote against this bill in the Medical Affairs Subcommittee, 2 Republicans voted for, but 4 abstained. And it looks like that is where it will stay. As you said, it's deeply unpopular, even with the pro-life, pro-family groups, because it is such an outlier, not just banning abortion, but really getting into a realm of being punitive, of taking people in desperate situations in many cases and saying, not only are you essentially trapped there, but now we're going to throw you in prison for trying to find a way out. So for me, we see so many bills that aren't going anywhere, yet this one got multiple days of testimony. And so the question is why? Why did the lawmakers give it this much notice and attention?
And that right there is the bigger question as to why in the world did we spend basically 2 days of testimony, 2 days of hearings to do nothing? And there has been talk that this was offered to the bill's sponsors as at least we'll have a hearing on this bill in exchange for some vote that took place during the last part of the legislative session. We don't know if it was for the liquor liability and insurance reform issues, if there was something else that was on the table, but this bill got a hearing in Medical Affairs despite the fact that it had so little support within the communities that you would expect to be supportive of pro-life or anti-abortion legislation.
Right, so there could be a lot of different options for what was gained here. And when we look at bills, at legislation generally, at the hearings that are taking place at the State House, often a bill may be introduced, a hearing may be held in order to let people give voice, vent, as an educational tool. There are a lot of different reasons to start moving something forward, and it's definitely a bit of a dance, trying to figure out what moves forward, what doesn't in a given year. But in this case, I think one of the real educational tools that we can take from this is the situations that many women partners find themselves in, and what we can do as a community, as a state, to best address those situations. And for me, and apparently the vast, vast majority of people, including pro-lifers who testified on this bill, the answer is not to send them to jail for 30 years, but to help them find other solutions.
I think one of the most telling things that happened when the votes were taken during this hearing was one of the Republican lawmakers who abstained said, look, I think I speak for a lot of South Carolinians, and there are many more important things for us to be focusing on in this state right now than this. There is already a restrictive law in place as it is, and I think he may be correct on that.
6 weeks, exactly.
Yeah.
Right, when that heartbeat law, remember back in 2021, the heartbeat law, original heartbeat law was passed. It was challenged, made it to the Supreme Court. It was overturned. The legislature came back and we're faced in early 23 with two options. Do we redo the heartbeat law, or do we actually then try to pass a personhood bill, which this even goes beyond that?
Far beyond.
Far beyond. And the consensus among many folks was, let's go ahead and repass the heartbeat law. But that's not what the legislature did. They actually went the other direction. And Brian, to a point that we've had before, it actually opened up South Carolina to more abortions during that period, because it reverted everything to the law that had passed last, which was a 20-week pain-capable bill. So it backfired on Republican lawmakers who were trying to push that through. This is at least not doing anything else that could hinder that heartbeat law that's already on the books.
That's right. And, instead of doing this 1-2 punch that, some people advocated for
Right.
back in 2023, we instead are looking at becoming, if this were ever to pass, the most extreme state in the nation on abortion law.
And I think very clearly the members of the legislature in the South Carolina Senate said, we're going to take this. If there's ever a time to put something and table something, I think we're probably going to see it sitting on the table well past Thanksgiving and the rest of the legislative session.
I think you are right. The time is now to table it, and the time is now to end this particular segment. But we are going to be talking, if people don't like what they're hearing in meetings like this, the power of the vote is so very important. We are talking about possible changes to who you would vote for, what your district is. We're talking redistricting when we come back. There's a movement afoot around the country to redraw these maps again. We've talked about it before, but we're going to talk about it again when we come back on Connect to the Capitol. All right, welcome back to Connect to the Capitol. The power of the vote, how you vote, who you vote for, the words redistricting, the words gerrymandering. We use them a lot on this program here, Connect to the Capitol. The bottom line is the candidates you get to put on your ballot could change. Dave and Catherine, up in the nation's capital this week. And back in the States is Catherine, if you missed segment number 1, and we're glad.
Finally back.
And we're glad to have her. We're glad to have her.
Here's the thing, Brian, to the point that you're making here, remember that there are legislative boundary lines. We call them districts. Those districts are set right after we have the census. We have the census every 10 years. That's a constitutional thing that is required to see how many people we have and figure out how we're going to divide up those districts. Well, right now, South Carolina's 7 congressional districts seem to be kind of grouped into certain areas. The 3rd congressional districts there in the upstate, Pickens, Oconee, and Abbeville and Anderson counties. And as you begin to look, though, Representative Jordan Pace, member of the Freedom Caucus, has put out a new map of recommendations for changes in the middle of this particular decade, which is a very odd time to be changing district lines.
Not traditional.
Not traditional at all, but he's recommending changing district lines that would completely reshape the way that we are organized as districts here in South Carolina.
So you think back to the founding of our nation, and when we first came over from Europe, well, some of the ancestors of some people, when they came over from Europe, they started off on the East Coast and started venturing west, trying to explore, find out what this land looked like, what it was shaped as. You think George Washington, a lot of those other founding fathers.
They were farmers too.
Yes.
Exactly.
And they were map makers. They were going out and surveying the land. And for me, when you take a look at these proposed maps, it's an affront to our founding fathers.
It really is. I mean, when you start looking, Brian, and Marcus, I don't know if you can put that up on the screen at the moment or if it is already. When you start looking at changing congressional districts that go all the way from Oconee County, run all the way down the Savannah to Jasper County, please tell me what those communities have in common, because that's a really long stretch for a congressperson to have to go back and forth. The other thing, Brian, though, is that this particular map would eliminate almost any chance of having a Democratic seat in Congress from South Carolina. There's 6 Republicans and 1 Democrat. That would be Representative Jim Clyburn. Clyburn's district, though, in the way the current map is kind of gerrymandered, because it goes all the way from Richland County, swaths all the way through, and ends up in the peninsula of Charleston in downtown.
Yep.
When you're drawing these maps, it seems to me that the goal should be to have something that makes sense. Look at geographic boundaries, look at political boundaries, maybe have something that looks more like a Colorado shape, a Wyoming shape, a South Carolina shape, kind of a ball of dough or something instead of a hot dog, or like a jump rope where it's stretched out from the north of the state down to the south. It simply, it becomes very hard to argue that you're not map making for an outcome.
Right, and that's what we're beginning to see, though, Catherine, that other states have talked about doing. Texas said, listen, we can do this. We can redraw our maps and put 5 more Republican seats in Congress. Well, keep in mind, Congress is only 219 to 214. So that's, as we've said before, it's a very, very close, thin margin for the majority, which is the Republicans at the moment. California said, well, that's fine. We'll do the same thing. We'll put more Democrats in Congress. And this kind of map make changes hit a snag in federal court.
Exactly. So the federal court has kind of smacked down Texas and said, okay, you can't do this. This is not the way things are supposed to be done. So that's gone back down. But we need a better way here, a way that isn't just trying to find the outcome, but that really does give voice to the people, because that's the entire point of Congress, and it isn't always the way things are playing out.
And so there has been this talk of, if we can remap these states and start changing what happens in the midterm elections, because that's the reason that they're doing this right now too, Brian. When Trump came into office, winning in 2024, the midterm elections come up in 2026, and they're beginning to recognize, if we don't do something, there could be a loss of control for the Republicans in the U.S. House, which would then create a level of imbalance for what the Republicans are wanting to see happen.
And yet it might be what the people want to see happen in Congress, and sometimes a party may lose an election.
Well, and that's what we actually see historically.
Right.
I mean, historically, after a president wins an election, typically in the next midterm, if they had the majority in a House, they would tend to lose that, because changes come in and happen so fast. And if there has been a presidency in its first 10 months that has seen a lot of change taking place, some people say it feels like it's been not 3 seasons, but more like 3 years already, with as much stuff that's happened with the Donald Trump administration.
And it already seems like we're starting to see the start of a blue wave with some of those elections we've already had earlier, just a few weeks ago. So, it would not be surprising if that continued.
Right.
No, not at all, because it's coming hot and heavy. It is election season for sure, as we head into even at the state level here in just a few months, when those primaries come around.
Right. And the other part about it too, Brian, is as much as this map has seen the light of day from Representative Jordan Pace, and Ralph Norman's kind of given it a thumbs up too in his gubernatorial election, It has to pass both the South Carolina House and the South Carolina Senate before it could become law.
Good point.
And I don't necessarily think we're going to be seeing that. So
I don't either.
sometimes you have to ask the question, is this just more of a political show leading up to the beginning of the next legislative session?
Throw out the red meat. That's what it is. That's all it is. Throw out the red meat to the masses. All right, we're going to wrap up discussion now on that topic. We're going to shift gears when we come into the next segment. We're talking about the death penalty here in South Carolina in our next segment here. 7th execution since the state has resumed capital punishment a little over a year ago. We're going to talk about the future of that, because Dave and I, we touched on this last week, but this could be the last execution we see for a while, and some people at the State House say maybe they want to make it forever. That's when we come back.
That's a decision for God to make. No man is perfect. No judicial system is perfect.
He was sentenced to death for murdering Tijan, whom he shot 9 times, burned his face and eyes with a cigarette, and wrote, "Catch me if you can," on the wall in the victim's blood.
That was a little over a week ago. The execution of Stephen Bryant for horrific crimes over a multi-day period back in 2004, killing multiple people, and you heard the description of one of those deaths there. He was put to death by firing squad, the 3rd South Carolina inmate to be put to death by firing squad just this year, and the 7th inmate executed since capital punishment resumed here in the state. 50th overall, by the way, since the death penalty resumed in the state more than 40 years ago. Now, this could be the last execution we see for a while here in South Carolina. First reason, we've seemingly worked through that backlog after that 13-year pause on executions in the state. But part 2 of that, there has been some momentum that has been picked up, not only by the protesters that are there each and every time that someone is put to death, but even at the State House. Dave, we talked about this briefly last week. We don't know how much traction an anti-death penalty measure would get at the State House, but it is out there, and we're going to probably see it come January.
We do expect to see that, and we are seeing increasing momentum coming not only from the people who are seeing 7 executions in about a year, just death after death, and are asking why. Are saying, how is this making our state a safer place? When you look at all of the different factors involved, the morality, a lot of religious folks have got some opinions on it. When you look at the cost and the cost incentives there, and just how we are actually trying to build a state that focuses on restorative justice rather than just punishment. There are a lot of questions that are being raised. So we are expecting to see a bill come before the State House being introduced in January. Not only that, but one of our senators has actually come out in the last week or so and publicly said that he would be a governor who would grant clemency. Senator Josh Kimbrell, one of our gubernatorial candidates.
That is a big statement, because there has not been clemency offered by any governor in South Carolina since it has been reinstated. So that is a huge statement on that particular front.
And that's true even for the cases where there is genuine question about these men's guilt,
Right.
Even where it definitely seems that this person may not have even committed the crime, may not have even been there. We still have not seen clemency in a single case.
Well, and the other interesting part of this, and there are statistics that are out there that show this, Brian and Catherine, when you take a look at a capital murder case versus a death penalty case, the cost to the state of South Carolina to do a death penalty case is almost an extra $1 million over the time period of that particular case and all the way through to execution. $1 million, instead of just putting the person up for a life sentence or 30 years, whatever the case may be, when you go to the death penalty phase, because of what's required in appeals, what's required in all of those other elements that go into it.
Which you have to even have any shred of hope of actually proving that this was the person.
Right. And so in that particular case, an extra $1 million is the average price. And think about this, not that long ago, there were 34 people on death row. That's $34 million that the state of South Carolina has been having to put into its work in prosecuting and bringing to the point of execution those particular men.
So
And keep in mind, there are no women on death row.
that's true. So it's either kill 34 people or fund SNAP, for example.
Maybe.
Interesting proposal there. And of course, there's talk about that. If we ever have another government shutdown, we have to have a rainy day fund in place to fund those particular programs.
Which is exactly what Jermaine Johnson brought
Yeah.
up while you were gone. Jermaine Johnson brought that up as an opportunity that actually needed to be focused on, which is what's our backup plan. So there's going to be a lot going on at the State House and a lot of probably different discussions than what we have been having in the past, because it's election season, folks, which means that people are going to start doing everything they can to start raising that profile.
Buckle
or
up.
at least something.
Buckle up, it's coming. That wraps up the discussion for this particular segment. When we come back, immigration enforcement efforts in the Carolinas. A lot of talk, a lot of buzz here in South Carolina this week after seeing what was going on just north of us in North Carolina. We're going to wrap up quickly when we get back.
Listen, all this stuff down. 5 minutes ago.
What you're looking at there is an arrest up in the Charlotte area. Immigration enforcement officers bringing someone in there. There were protests up in North Carolina, Charlotte, and in Raleigh about the presence of the officers in that state. Reports this week, multiple reports, more than 24 of sightings of officers here in South Carolina. Now, we talked to an advocate who works with the immigrant community. They're aware of this. They say having ICE officers in the region is nothing new. But there is a level of hysteria right now, both Dave and Catherine, about this for people in our community.
You know, speaking of how we're spending our government resources, as we look to these ICE raids that we've seen everywhere from businesses to the streets of our nation, from coast to coast, there have been a lot of questions about how these have actually taken place. The constitutional rules, mandates being followed, who exactly is being targeted, even people who are in the country legally, who are citizens or documented immigrants, who are nonetheless being rounded up and seeing deep repercussions. That's an ongoing question as we see ICE increasingly in our state.
So as you were wrapping up trying to get back to the States, I was in another part of the state earlier this week up in York County, and actually had a conversation with a gentleman who owns a construction company, and he has documented immigrants who are working on his team. But he said that sometimes they're afraid to come to work to be scooped up by an ICE raid, because keep in mind, this is right outside the Charlotte area. They've been hearing about this, but they're fearful of showing up, even though they have the documentation, even though they're here legally. There's a big concern among certain populations in South Carolina, and it's beginning to affect workforce and people showing up and things that need to get done, not only in construction, but in agriculture as well.
And therefore affecting kitchen table prices.
There you go. So that's one of the things that, when you look at a national immigration issue, and this is something that's been brought up, it's time to actually start trying to figure out how do you have planned immigration strategies instead of just rounding everybody up and sending everybody back. Though you don't want to have the wrong people doing wrong things in our country.
Right. And sometimes these people don't have a country to go back to because they were actually here legally.
Right.
To begin with. Hey, good show, as always, my friends. You talked about prices, the table. Thanksgiving this week. We can't get out of here without everybody getting those wishes.
Yeah, have a great Thanksgiving. Enjoy the time with family. Eat a lot.
Yes.
Because, it's that time of year.
Focus on what we're thankful for.
Exactly.
We had our WACH Fox News Thanksgiving just the other day, and trust me, I'm still full. So I'll be ready by Thursday. Thank you again, Dave and Catherine. Safe travels to you. Happy Thanksgiving to you, and happy Thanksgiving to everybody that's watching. We'll see you again next week.